You're listening to the Unsung Podcast, where we talk about classic albums and decide if they deserve that distinction. And we also talk about some unsung classics in the hopes of bringing them to a new audience. And at the end of it all, we let you decide if we were right or wrong. This is the Unsung Podcast. You're listening to the Unsung Podcast. This is episode 26. On last week's episode, we were talking about the third album, Never Better, by Minneapolis hip-hop artist POS, and the result was an overwhelming yes. That's right, the public, you guys, you decided that POS's Never Better will make it into our discography, so thank you very much to everybody who voted. Let's crack on. This week we're talking about Allelujah, Don't Bend, Ascend by Godspeed You, Black Emperor. I think this is our first proper foray into post-rock territory, so we hope you enjoy it.
With his arms outstretched. Okay. Can you get her? Do you see her? No. Shoot. Hang on. With his arms outstretched.
Hi, you're listening to the Unsung Podcast. I am your host Mark Fraser, and I'm joined by a guy in an Elf t-shirt and a guy in a Converse t-shirt.
Yeah, and
the Converse t-shirt's white.
I got in first. I'm here. I don't know what to do now, but I did definitely get in first. And if I stop talking for even a moment, then David will seize the upper hand. I was editing the episodes, and I noticed that David tends to gain the upper hand in these intro bits. So it's today, I chose a high stool. So the man to my down and left is Dave Weaver. Get it up, you.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I just have to get in there first if I'm to get in anything at all, really. So, you know,
that's a tragic tale.
I know. Life with Chris Cusack. To my right is Mr. Chris Cusack, who I can see is wearing his official Taekwondo black belt that he passed when he was 14.
May or may not be true.
Everybody's so discriminatory when it comes to martial arts. It's like, what's it you do, mate? What's it you do? Karate? Yeah, they're all really different, a bit like races, thanks, but yeah, one's as good as the other for Joe Publica.
Yeah, it's true. So before we get into this episode, there's two things I want to clear up. One, my flatmate has told us he listened to the Will Haven episode, and he said that Mad Dog is only kosher if it is touched by people who are not Jewish. If it was only touched by Jewish people, if it was touched by people who are not Jewish, then it's not kosher.
Yeah, that would be weird then.
Okay.
Touched as in the bottle, or as in if they put their finger in it?
As in like when it's getting made.
Right, okay.
Oh, right,
That's
okay.
like
I thought you meant in like general.
Yeah, so there we go. And the second bit of housekeeping, we've got a first ever listener from Botswana. So hello,
really?
Hello
there.
Botswana?
Yeah,
that's tremendous.
Fantastic.
We've also got one from Abu Dhabi, so
we are global.
Cool. We're definitely global.
Hello everybody.
The guy that lives across the road from my mum works in Abu Dhabi, so maybe it's a pity listener.
Maybe.
Like so many.
Do you know where our third most listens come from? Turkey. Inexplicably. It's Britain and America than Turkey.
Interesting.
Don't understand. So all those 170 people that have listened to us in Turkey, hi.
Wow.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
The last 170 people in Turkey listening to anything that wasn't put out by the state.
So yes, on this episode we're hitting peak Chris Cusack. We're doing Godspeed You, Black Emperor.
It's been a lot about me.
It has. This is you.
This is peak though. This
is the most notes I've done for one of the normal episodes. I know I had like 21 pages for the Grunge podcast,
chapters and shit.
Yeah, no, this is a labour of love, this one. Yeah, I mean, this is honestly, I think, one of the best musical acts, full stop. I just think they're next level in almost every way. Concept, execution, their messages, their skill, like their ability as musicians, their ideas, their bravery, the way they work with Constellation Records, their dedication to DIY. If I had a band as an avatar, it would be Godspeed You, Black Emperor.
Yep.
But what record is it though?
It's Allelujah, Don't Bend, Ascend.
I like that accent.
It's like, man, there's so many exclamation marks in this band that it's hard to know.
They're big on syntax, aren't they? Yeah.
They change it though.
Yeah, they put their exclamation mark in different points.
Yeah, before they did Yankee UXO, they moved their exclamation mark earlier, so you now have to write the name GY exclamation mark BE instead of GY comma BE exclamation mark.
Mark, were you a big fan of Godspeed?
Yeah, I'd heard. Well, no, I wasn't, but I had heard Skinny Fist a few years ago, and I was quite taken by it. But then I kind of didn't listen anymore to it. I've heard some Silver Mountain Zion stuff as well, which I've really enjoyed.
Yeah.
So I was kind of coming to this a bit fresh because I hadn't really listened to them for a long time. But I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm not even
You're
slightly
not
surprised. I'm not fresh.
Oh, you're not fresh. No,
It's
you're
a hot-
definitely not fresh.
It's a warm day. Come
It
on.
is sweaty.
Oh, Jesus.
It hasn't rained in Glasgow for 6 weeks.
And actually, Mark and I did comment on this before you got here that of all the days to have to cover Godspeed, I mean, Godspeed translates well in Scotland where things are generally dark,
Rolling
and somber,
hills and
laborious.
misty, and and now it's
big
like
clouds.
just weeks and weeks of sunshine and optimism and
Yeah, it doesn't really
shirtless people from the East End.
It is weird.
Suntans everywhere.
Yeah,
sunburn.
sunburns.
Absolutely burn.
Scottish people don't really tan.
No, I go red and then white again. It's fine.
Yeah, so this is a strange climate in which to cover a band that's so atmospheric and somber and sprawling and all that kind of stuff.
Oppressive.
Also, I think the point you're maybe making is that because of where we record currently, we have to keep the windows shut because otherwise you'll hear nothing but Glasgow ambience, and therefore it's getting a little bit warm in here.
It is sweaty.
Balls are definitely sweaty.
No, but talking about Scotland being appropriate for Godspeed, when the last album,
Luciferian Towers.
Luciferian Towers, I never thought. I didn't think there was an I in there.
well,
Oh yeah, no, there is.
yeah,
Luciferian
Lucifer
Towers, as in
is
Lucifer. Yeah, as soon as I got that album, I drove up to the northwest of Scotland and just
because
had
you've
it.
got that album.
Pretty much. I was like, I
must isolate.
yeah, exactly. And I just drove through the hills with ominous clouds, and it was just unbelievably perfect. And that's kind of how all Godspeed records should be listened to.
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that so many people move from Scotland to Canada and feel quite at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I first listened to this record driving back from Edinburgh at night, and it was pretty perfect as well. It's a really good night driving record. A lot of their records are, but this one, especially the main song, I would say the main movement of the piece.
I mean, yeah,
The
I mean,
first movement,
this
yeah.
album, it's probably good to actually. We'll get to the details of why this album and why not other albums, but this album only has 4 tracks in it, and it only really has 2 proper tracks in it, which made the whole decision-making process about which album we were going to cover quite difficult, because 2 of the tracks in this are really just holding patterns or pacers, filler. Some people would say. I don't see these ones as being filler, which is
Ambient noise.
yes, exactly. There's whole genres that sound sillier than these 2 tracks.
Yeah.
But the other 2 tracks are exceptionally good, and especially the one that I'm guessing you're referring to as Mladic,
yeah.
which I think is, for me, is the best piece of post-rock music that's ever been made. Just putting that out there, I think it's the epitome of what post-rock can be, as opposed to sort of kind of overused delay pedals and meandering sort of cymbals and big crashes and all kinds of stuff that bands like well, we don't need to shit on anyone just yet, there's plenty of time for that later.
It's certainly up there.
Yeah, I mean,
in terms of scope, in terms of how they pull it off as well.
I think the second track, We Drift Like Worried Fire, the third track, but the second proper track, We Drift Like Worried Fire, is the closest they got to quite a conventional post-rock sound. Like it's quite guitar-y and quite...
Do you know, so you say that, I'm just so annoyed that I couldn't find this, but maybe what I will have done is gone through a hard drive and then found it before we edit this, and you can play it. But when I was back at uni, I just used to listen to lots of post-rock, basically just Cult of Luna and Godspeed and Mogwai. And I used to write a lot of post-rock stuff and never made a band. Well, actually, we did. Me and my pal played one gig.
High school?
No, in university.
What was the band called?
Sharks That Circle.
Oh, wow.
Which is actually a Zozobra song. So we were, from good post-rock stock there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I fucking wrote We Drift Like Worried Fire. I 100% did. I think I must have recorded it in like 2007, maybe 2006, and I wrote that exact riff.
Are we talking legal suits here?
I mean, if I can find it, it's like recorded through the inbuilt microphone on an iMac onto iTunes in my hall's room. But I did write that, and then see, when I first heard that song, I was like, wait a minute, that's my song. But then they kind of made it better. But there you go.
Yeah.
So
good on them, because they could have just left it as it was.
I know.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's my claim.
Trying to throw people off their scent. Like, what's that shit song? That sounds like one of Weaver's.
Yeah, exactly. I know. It's the worst on the album, me. Anyway, that's my part.
Well, thanks for that story.
Anytime. I can go home now.
I'll be doing most of the talking from here, guys. Sit back. Yeah, right. So, we need to set the scene a wee bit. Godspeed You Black Emperor is a musical collective from Montreal in Canada, and it actually originally started as a kind of revolving lineup with some kind of core members. I think at one point they had like an unwieldy number of people turning up for shows, and then they eventually settled on, I think it was nine people.
As you do. I just have 9 people in this band.
Yeah, them versus Slipknot. That'd be a good football tournament with 2 ringers each. Bagsy going in Slipknot's team. But yeah, they released a record in '94 called All Lights Fucked on the Hairy Amp Drooling. You may notice a pattern of Godspeed You picking ridiculous names for almost everything. They have some kind of strange dialect when it comes to their...
Some would say that they could be classified as slightly pretentious, Chris. I'm not me. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
I'll allow that at this early stage.
Well, see to that comment, I would have to say, if someone's going to call them pretentious, right? Someone's going to call them pretentious. What are they pretending to be that they're not?
You're taking the word quite literally.
Yeah.
I think what they're creating is art.
Yeah,
and all art is pretentious at some point.
Let's not go down this hole so soon.
Well,
You've got a lot to get through.
I fucking love it. Carry on.
Yeah, it's a little bit pompous, but there's a place for that. I mean, we spoke about, in the Mogwai episode, we spoke about tabloid versus broadsheet post-rock.
Mm-hmm.
And Godspeed is definitely broadsheet post-rock. But Godspeed is kind of...
Daily Telegraph?
No,
I was thinking Telegraph as well, actually.
It's actually more like the Morning Star, given their personal politics.
Yeah, they are fairly left.
But yeah, I mean, they're very highfalutin, for want of a more colloquial phrase than that. Even that
printed on premium paper.
Yeah, but printed by hand.
Yeah,
on an old-fashioned press.
Yeah.
Yeah,
John using calligraphy. Or parchment.
Yeah. So Godspeed. Yeah, they're to me the epitome of that kind of broadsheet post-rock, because it's basically neoclassical. It's like modern classical music kind of interpreted via what we would now consider conventional instruments, albeit like guitar, bass, drums, bits of brass, a lot of strings like cellos, double basses, violins, and the odd bits and bobs of other stuff, a bit of like keyboard, piano, I think they've got bagpipes and some other stuff as well.
Fucking bagpipes.
They should leave it to Korn.
Or the whole of our country.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Can I just say,
entire tourist industry.
Obviously, I'm not as familiar with their entire oeuvre as you guys are, right? But it seems to me that neoclassical would be a much better way of describing them, because there isn't even rock structure wise to the songs for the most part.
The only problem with neoclassical as a description is it kind of veers towards, I mean, everything from like Arvo Part to like guys like Johan Johansson, which are no, it's not neoclassical in that sense. There are points.
I think it's closer than any kind of rock music though. It's a much closer classification.
But they're a rock band. I think that's the
you
thing.
think so?
They're a rock band playing. I mean,
We Drift Like Wood and Fire
expansive music
is rock music for at least 5 minutes of it, and Mladic has some riffs on it that
totally,
are
but
just
they completely eschew
heavy riffs,
traditional rock structure.
Arrangement wise, but in terms of like
in terms of performance, they're a rock band.
And the aesthetic, and they're very, very pared back in the presentation. Like the whole thing is that they have this kind of anarchist squat chic that goes around all of their material and their general demeanour. I
think the reason I bring it up is because I think there's I'd be worried to call them, obviously they do have like rock moments, but I'd be worried about calling them rock band or a post-rock band, because it kind of in a way can be seen as denigrating the guitar as a classical instrument. Does that make sense?
I know what you're saying, they use it in a very interesting way. Actually, something that when I was researching this was brought up, and I can't believe after nearly 20 years listening to this band that I hadn't noticed it beforehand, but their guitar is actually used a lot of the time in a way very similar, or very in a way it's very reminiscent of Ennio Morricone, and that just had not occurred to me at all. And then listening back now, it's all I can hear. Like, it does sound like Ennio Morricone, and especially in some of the earlier stuff, there's some really strong, like we'll call it F sharp A sharp infinity for people just seeing the album name written. And actually, it's fades to infinity, but that album, the guitar in it is very much a spaghetti western feel to it. Right, I mean, okay, we could definitely get into the classification thing, and I think that'll become an issue as we go through their career as well. It kind of varies. The name Godspeed You Black Emperor came from it was a 1976 Japanese documentary about a motorcycle gang called the Black Emperors. They have loads of spin-off projects. You mentioned Silver Mount Zion. They also have members that are involved with things like Fly Pan Am, a band called HRSTA, and I don't know if they just roll that into Hrsta or if they do go for the letters. Esmerine, who are a band that I'd heard about and I'd never actually bothered to listen to in any great depth, but they're fantastic, like really good. The stuff I've now heard is excellent, and it's something I'm going to get really setting about. Also Set Fire to Flames, who were quite an experimental kind of post-rock in the very post sense, like almost like art at points, like just really, really out there. So they've got a lot of things circling around them. And Silver Mount Zion are a fantastic band, like a really, really wonderful band, and I think at points as good as, consistently probably over the piece, as good as Godspeed You Black Emperor in terms of quality. They don't have Mladic though, because Mladic is just like your secret weapon. One of the reasons that a lot of people haven't heard Godspeed, especially people like yourself, Mark, is probably because they went in like an extended hiatus from 2003 through to 2010, which is like a really kind of key time for you when you were getting into music.
I could tell Skinny Fist when they were no longer a band.
Yeah, I had listened to stuff before that, but I hadn't been invested in them. I only really got invested in them when in that year that they split up, and I just never assumed I was never going to see them.
Yeah, it was about 2004, 2005 I started getting into them,
and I did not think I would get the chance to see them. But in 2010 they reunited for All Tomorrow's Parties, now defunct, but they got back together again for that, which caused a huge buzz, and then started playing new music, which was terrific, obviously, because they also have that maybe unusual trait of coming back from an extended hiatus and being every bit as good, I would say better than they were prior to the hiatus, which is not a common occurrence.
It seems that like they just picked up where they left off, and you know, like a couple of bits of music on this record are actually old tracks that they'd like played before and then never finished. Obviously 2003 was a pretty significant year politically as well, and Godspeed You Black Emperor, being Godspeed You Black Emperor, couldn't really separate their existence as a band from the politics of the time. I think Ephraim Menock, you're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, exactly. So Ephraim Menock, who's seen in a lot of ways as being like the mouthpiece of the band, albeit the band don't really have a mouthpiece. They've gone for much more of a kind of, they subscribe to anarchist politics, at least a few of them do, including Ephraim, and they tend to try and keep everything quite communal. But he cited the Iraq invasion or the Iraq war of 2003 as having caused a, inverted commas, existential freakout, and he found it subsequently quite difficult to engage with his art and enjoy his art given the consequences of that invasion and given what was happening globally. We'll come back to that later on. I've got a lot of time for some of the politics of Godspeed You Black Emperor. I have some real eye-rolling moments with the politics of Godspeed You Black Emperor as well. And it's easy to put things under a microscope because not everybody's 100% consistent, but there are some things that I think reinforce that sort of suggestion of pretentiousness a little bit. And I say that in a very qualified way, but I'll go back into that. In 2003, they also had a really odd experience when they were touring the States. I think it was like outside Oklahoma. The band went to a petrol station to fill up, as you do on tour, and basically somebody working in the petrol station passed a note to another customer asking them to immediately phone the authorities, and the band were detained at the petrol station by the local police until the FBI could show up, and the FBI then interrogated them as potential terrorists for quite some period of time. Supposedly they searched their vehicle, they found a whole bunch of the blueprints and pictures and stuff. Now if you've ever seen Godspeed You Black Emperor live, you'll know that their live show very, very heavily involves live visuals, and again we'll talk about that in a wee bit as well. And I suspect a lot of these images of buildings and maps and things like that and blueprints were for those visuals. But the FBI detained them for quite some time. And there was like a kind of accumulation of strange and disheartening events over that year that seemed to just eventually like suck the energy out of the band, and they vanished from sight for a good 7 years. I would say as well, it's the last album before that hiatus, Yankee UXO, is for me their weakest album. And I think that possibly played a part in terms of them feeling like, do we still have something fresh to say?
Well, I mean, that's I think it'd be fair to say that maybe they were feeling that sort of slightly disappointed third album syndrome, because their first two records had just been so incredibly well received, and then it's got to take it out of you. I just can't imagine being in a band with 9 people. Like, it's hard enough getting the 3 of us in a room together, once a week. So how the hell do you do 9 people, put together their full creative ideas, and everybody's got things they like and things they don't like, and
then choosing to structure songs in such a way as well, and write music in such a way where it's not just like 4 chords in 3 minutes. It requires deep compositional techniques, which must be a total arseache to try and arrange beforehand, and then to do live, and then to do in the studio, but they do it fucking exceptionally well. So
there's like a couple of like notable kind of like prominent moments in their career. One was in 2002 when the film 28 Days Later came out, and there's a track called East Hastings, which is a well-known Godspeed track in its own right, and there was a version of that used in the soundtrack to 28 Days Later.
Henry Jackman was the one that did the score for it, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, that was included, but it wasn't included in the official soundtrack because it was licensed to Constellation, and the official soundtrack I think came out on Warner, and therefore they refused to let it be included because they wouldn't release it. But
that was the bit when he sort of wakes up.
I think it's Cillian Murphy on the bridge in London,
and he's on that like it's really iconic empty London, and he doesn't know what's going on, and the music just fits in perfectly.
It's so well chosen.
I mean, I suppose Godspeed are a very, very cinematic band, though.
They are.
Much like Mogwai, where, it's like kind of built to soundtrack stuff.
You see a lot of, because Godspeed won't play the game with major labels and major studios, to their credit, you see a lot of soundtracks that feature music that is clearly trying to approximate what Godspeed might
very
do
heavily
in
influenced by
that situation. Yeah, a big part of the Godspeed world is Constellation Records, and myself included, I think a lot of people conflate Godspeed directly with Constellation Records. It's not actually the same thing. The members of Godspeed don't own Constellation. There's a guy called Ian Alavsky, I think his name is, and Don Wilkie. Godspeed are definitely the most famous artist on that label, and it is based in Montreal, and they have worked together pretty much throughout. I think that the first Godspeed records came out on Cranky on CD, but they were released by Constellation and all their other formats. Constellation Records and the ethos of Constellation Records, its DIY approach, its very anti-corporate stances, has been a huge contributing factor to how people perceive the band as well. I think a bit like Fugazi and Discord, albeit Fugazi are much more directly involved in Discord, which is perhaps where the conflation came from with this. But like Constellation, for as someone that set up a label himself, like Constellation was as much the template as anybody. It's a sensational label, really, really good and very communicative. I remember our label wrote to Constellation to ask for advice about recyclable and sustainable packaging. And they got back to us quickly and they gave us some advice, and they were very communicative, and that sort of responsiveness and paying it forward really kind of helps not just the scene but the wider health of the DIY and underground community. That said, a caveat with Constellation would be, for me, some of their attitude to the BDS movement. Another big part of the Godspeed universe is Hotel to Tango, which was the site of a lot of their recordings, a lot of their demos, and it was set up by Ephraim Menock and Thierry Amar, two of the members of the band, and they joined up with a guy called Howard Billerman and started it in 2000, and it's since been used by a whole bunch of famous Canadian exports like Arcade Fire, Wolf Parade, Own Palette. I think at one point as well, Silver Mount Zion obviously use it as well, and at one point while they were recording, I believe Leonard Cohen visited to try and watch the sessions.
That's pretty cool.
As I say, Ephraim identifies as an anarchist, and true to their DIY ethos, they say things like they describe themselves as taper friendly, so they have no problem with people recording and distributing their live shows, which is I don't know if I've ever actually heard another band go on the record as saying describing themselves as taper friendly.
Well, there are a few acts that have put around official bootlegs and stuff and been on board with it, but
Bruce Springsteen does it a lot.
Yeah,
which is weird for an artist that big. You can actually go onto a website which you can listen to every single show he's ever done. Like in the past 15 years, it's all been recorded, and just go and listen to it.
Well, Fugazi and Pearl Jam did a similar thing, but they did it in the sense that they recorded their own shows and released them to try and undermine the bootleggers. Whereas Godspeed are doing it and are taking a different approach, which is like, go for it.
Yeah, very supportive.
Plus, seeing the guy's an archivist at heart, so I mean, it would make sense that he'd want to have that. I think he's always been that librarian, But
I think that the Godspeed thing, true to their politics in some sense, it is that step further where they're like, bootleg show, that's fine, go for it. And because live, so much of it is interpreted differently, so much of it is open to performance and mood and how the band are feeling and stuff, that everything's different.
Whenever I think of bootleg, I always think of Prince, because he was like the exact opposite. He was like, put your phone away, don't record my shit.
Yeah, it's all about right now.
Yeah, it's all about living that moment, and it's that moment, and that's what it is. And if you can go and get like bootlegs, there's hundreds of bootlegs online, literally so many. But he was like, nah, I'm getting them taken down if they become popular. Weird.
A big part of the Godspeed shows, as we said earlier on, is about the visuals. For anyone that's seen them, they'll know what that means. But live, they use a sort of split screen thing, and they have an array of analog projectors set up, like really like old school, like reel to reel projectors. And there's a couple of people manipulating those as the show goes on. I don't know if it maybe just used to be one projector, but I do know it was a guy called John Littlefair that started this with them, and he toured with them. Basically, he's listed as a member of the band, and it's now somebody called Philippe Leonard and Carl Lemieux. But the visuals that they use for the songs quite often form the working titles of the songs. So whether it's buildings or railroads off of Luciferian Towers, those tend to be the themes that they use. So in Luciferian Towers, there's a camera, it's probably a drone, slowly ascending up the side of an abandoned, or I don't know, it's maybe from one of those ghost cities in China, of a skyscraper. And while the music is happening, the people who are doing the projections, they distort them, and via things like burning, via things like using glass in front of the lens, so that the actual projection on the venue is warped in these beautiful ways. They merge between them. The left will cut out, the right will come in, the right will cut out, the left will come in. The left and the right will be the same footage but slightly staggered. I mean, it's a whole performance in and of itself, and again, to the band, it's an indispensable part of their set. It is part of their thing. It's not just a musical artistic endeavour, it's an audio visual artistic endeavour. I just lifted a can of beer to take a little drink because it's getting kind of warm in here. The beer's made some funky marks on the table.
That's actually stained the table.
Yeah, and it's like the first thing I always think is, what's it doing inside me?
Well, who absolutely knows? I know. One time I spilt some Lidl freeway cola on the street, and it left an oil slick mark there for 6 months on the tarmac. I was like, holy shit! I've put a whole 2 litre bottle of that down me in the last.
You ever put a coin in cola? Done that old experiment?
It's mental, isn't it?
Wow, man!
I know.
Get that on your inside.
I can't drink fizzy juice anymore. I've turned into my dad.
Clean the drains.
It's too bloody sweet, son. What's that? Get yourself some fizzy water.
David's off the bevy as well, and I was kind of saying to him, for a man who was the finest drinking machine I think I've ever met, for him not to be doing it, it's sort of like John Holmes joining the priesthood.
Well, you've got to know what you're good at to stop it. As Confucius once said.
I'm sure it was him.
Here's me trying to stop all the things I'm bad at, and I should be stopping the things I'm good at. Wow.
So bootlegging, it's a cool way to approach it, because it's always, like you've already said, obviously a very DIY band, and that's an awesome thing to do. It's also putting trust in the fans as well to like properly produce an accurate representation of what they sound like live. I mean, I think, to be honest, it's more than that. They're allowing there to be so many recordings out there that the average, the mean of those recordings is representative of them. I don't think they're assuming that any one recording is going to perfectly capture Godspeed or even be particularly high quality. I think they're just like, if there's enough there, people can listen through them, they'll find one they like, or 2 they like, or 10 they like, and they'll get a rough idea of what it's like to hear us and see us perform, even if they can or can't actually watch it themselves. And I think it's more of just a sort of letting go of control, attempting to control. I mean, it's the anti-Metallica in a lot of ways. It's the best. I think it's a really good way of approaching it as well, because there's going to be hundreds, thousands, maybe even, depending on how big the artist is, millions of people that will never be able to see the band live.
Yeah, and I mean, especially Israelis. Yeah. So I mean, and who in the world is not going to go and see a band because they saw a good video on YouTube? I mean, is that really the logic that a lot of these bands subscribe to?
I don't really understand it.
I don't get it either.
So you can't put up that recording that's far too close to the it's far too good and far too complimentary of our ability to play. Nobody's going to want to see us. It's like, I don't know.
Like in a few years, obviously a few years before he died, when he started doing this stuff with Third Gill, Prince would actually do his own, like get somebody with like a really good camera, just like film shows and put them on YouTube for them, because it's like, well, if someone's going to do it, I'll fucking do it, right? Hi guys, it's Mark here. Gonna just give you some money.
Oh, straight to the point.
We've been MacGyvering stuff for ages now, and frankly it's just getting tedious.
Yeah, both of our headphones have 5 pences
stuck to buttons
taped in, because we don't have that was old MacGyver over there.
Who did that? The Gypsy Prince.
Yeah,
the Gypsy Prince. So if you give us £1 or £2, we can buy more tape.
Is that racist?
To tape stuff together.
Yeah, isn't everyone?
We can't afford a lawyer to run by it. So,
if you give us some money, we can find out if that's racist, or if you are indeed a legal professional of some kind, then do let us know.
There's a guy called Michael Cohen going cheap right now.
I've heard that.
Let's cover our asses.
But yes, if you could donate anything, that would be really, really good. We're not quite children in need, but we are definitely men in semi-need of
semi-men
good equipment. We've had to borrow mics again this week, and it seems to be an ongoing thing. And guys, I'm tired. I'm just so tired.
God, we're pathetic.
I'm so tired.
We are really pathetic. I hate us right now. I know, hate us. Stop making us do this.
So yeah, www.unsongpod.net/donate. Give us some money, and we'll be much happier people.
obviously we kind of touched on Godspeed's politics, and their politics is like a really, really big part of this band. A good example, a good illustration, literally, of Godspeed's politics is the sleeve notes for the Yankee UXO album. And that depicts, on one side, the relationship between major labels and arms companies, and how subsidiaries of different corporations own them. So, you know, Time Warner, Sony, and it traces it back to things like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and all these different industries who were manufacturing the weapons that effectively were getting slung at Iraq and at Iraqi civilians. And they've always been a band that's very on point with that. It's very keen to kind of pick apart the mythology of people who assume that their artist is releasing something on an independent, and they just don't. It's just that kind of head in the sand, or, you know, hands over the ears, like blah 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 blah, I can't hear what you're saying. Like, Godspeed have always seemed to want to challenge that, and I personally really relate to that. I've actually used that diagram in a few different lectures that I gave a while ago, and it's such an interesting way to really challenge people's understanding of where their money goes and how you endorse a cause. You don't have to explicitly endorse a cause. You don't have to say, I advocate for arms companies. You don't have to say, I advocate for launching bombs at targets in Iraq.
What you can do is passively allow it.
Exactly. It just takes enough people looking the other way, and it also takes willful ignorance. And I think willful ignorance when it comes to record companies is a huge thing, because so many people want to assume that their artist is what they say they are. Marketing companies and A&R companies are so astute, such an incredibly finely honed art now, especially with the algorithmic approach that's come to the fore. The ability to weave between things and just like razor sharp targeting of people and telling people what they want to hear. If you want to depict an artist as being having cutting edge politics, as being an advocate for women's rights or black rights, or an anti-guns advocate, or standing up against a particular military incursion, that you can do that effortlessly now. And if you, as the audience member, just don't want to question that because that's what you want to hear, and the marketers know that, then you're deceiving yourself. And I think Godspeed, with a lot of their politics, and especially, for example, with that illustration and that cover, did a lot to kind of pull that apart. It was at the time actually criticised for being slightly inaccurate. I think they actually published an apology relating to the part of it where it conflated EMI and Warner. And then ironically in 2013 EMI
became Warner,
was bought by Warner. So like they apologised at the time for saying, yeah, that part of it, that's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, wasn't very properly researched, and then ultimately it came to pass. So on one hand, I have a hell of a lot of time for their politics, and it's a big part of why people love the band. I think not everybody, but it's a big part of why a core of their support love the band and the Constellation bands in general. I have, when we spoke about this episode in advance, I was like, I'm going to touch on the BDS movement here, guys, so be prepared.
Can you explain what the BDS movement is for people who don't know? Yeah,
boycott, divestment, sanctions. The BDS movement is something that's sprung up in opposition to the conduct of the Israeli army, specifically in Gaza and the West Bank. And it's a contentious thing, speaking as somebody that broadly and wholeheartedly decries the activities and the actions of the Israeli government in those areas. It's difficult though, because there's broad strokes involved, and I think there's a fair amount of hypocrisy involved. I know that members of Pink Floyd have been very outspoken about it recently, you know, asking people to boycott artists, and Tom York, I think, bore the brunt of it because he refused to boycott Israel.
Yeah, I think Dave Gilmour's part of BDS. Pretty sure he is.
Dave Gilmour? Yeah. He's one of the most vocal people on its behalf, and I can see the logic behind it. I mean, it's the most complicated and intractable problem on the planet, because it's political, it's military, it's geographical,
it's social,
it's religious.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just so it's.
Well, I did politics at uni, and we did a whole semester on just the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and over 12 weeks we just tackled a different general aspect of how fucked it was. and at the end of it was like, oh yeah, it's completely fucked. So that was my takeout from studying it.
It's horrendous, because no sensible person can put up a good argument against the fact that Israel's conduct, especially in West Bank, Gaza, is awful. It's just obscene, and the things that have been done are terrible.
BDS call it apartheid, don't they?
They compare it to apartheid, which I think's glib. To be honest,
it's a bit naive,
and I think some of the musical rhetoric around it is just, it's posture and it's marketing. It's people getting involved in an incredibly nuanced problem in a way that is quite self-serving and is, I think, a lot more to do with their own egos than anything else. Now, where that comes into play here is the fact that Godspeed are on Constellation Records. If you go on Constellation Records' website and try to buy especially Luciferian Towers, their most recent album, it says under it, does not ship to Israel. I don't think that the Godspeed fans in Israel are the problem. I think, if anything, the Godspeed fans in Israel are part of the solution. Now, I understand they're like, so yes, we want to impress upon them the importance that they stand up against their government. I think they get that. I really do. The unfortunate thing is we also live in a world where, whether people admit it or not, Jews are still very much the scapegoats for a lot of things. I mean, if you look at the conspiracy movements, anytime someone talks about, you know, the one world government, anytime someone talks about the Illuminati, they're talking a lot of the time in code for Jews. You know, anytime someone says, I don't hate Jews, I hate Zionists, but yet can't actually tell you what the difference is between those. Jews are still the whipping boys. Certainly not in Gaza, but on the whole. And therefore, this lazy approach that we take to these problems, assuming that we can wrap it all up in one soundbite, and assuming that feeding people narrow versions of our personal truth and take on that issue is going to somehow solve this, I think is really naive. I especially have an issue with that because Godspeed, first of all, were touring the USA in 2003. Now, I get that they stopped, that USA was invading Iraq. They've toured the USA multiple times since. Godspeed also played their first Chinese tour in 2013. Right, and there's no way to reconcile that as far as I can see in terms of making common sense. I mean, even official estimates of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict are about 51,000 deaths, 16,000 of which are Jewish. The Chinese claimed that 87,000 Tibetans were killed in response to the uprising in 59. The Tibetans claimed it's 430,000, but Godspeed will still tour in China. Now, I don't think Godspeed are going to change the mind of the Chinese government, but I don't think that not shipping to Israel is going to change the minds of the Israeli government. And I just think there's an incredibly facile posturing element to a lot of these things that serves left-wing conspiratorial thinking to kind of demonise the Jews, because conspiratorial thinking on both sides talks about the one world government. Conspiratorial thinking, I mean, the protocols of the Elders of Zion and all that bullshit that first made Jews out to be the bad guys, or first at least articulated all the different myths.
It was all fiction. It all came from literally all came from fiction. Yeah,
absolutely. That came from a book, I think it's called Biarritz, and it was literally a book of fiction about a conversation in a graveyard in the middle of the night. And I think these people getting involved in these to that extent, rather than putting it across in
nuanced ways, it sometimes comes across as like virtue signalling.
It's exactly that. That. There's a form of identity politics that you fall into there, which doesn't help the cause. It doesn't help foster understanding, and it certainly doesn't help the cause of trying to stamp out anti-Semitism, just in the same way as we're trying to stamp out this the horrendous actions in the West Bank.
Another way of looking at it is that they are a very small part of the debate, or of the entire thing, but what they're doing is they're forcing the debate. And what we've done on a music podcast now is talk about the Israeli-Palestine conflict for 10 minutes, and that comes from that boycott, and otherwise we wouldn't have talked about it.
True.
So, you know,
I do think they take exception to it, though. I think that's one of the problems. I don't think there are a lot of dissenting voices in that front. I think for the treatment of Tom York, for example, I've issues with Radiohead. I think they're hypocrites regarding their conduct with major labels, absolutely. But nobody really wanted to hear what Tom York had to say about that. They just wanted to slam him for not getting on the wagon. It's like, you know, everybody else is doing this. This is cool. This is the current. This is the zeitgeist movement. You know,
this is our anti-establishment wagon right now. Get on it.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway,
how this album's good though, eh?
I hate to bring it back to Prince, but I need to do this. Sorry, but he was a person that he would often be asked when he had interviews, very rarely, about some current events, and sometimes he'd give an answer which was maybe not particularly well thought out. And there was an interview in The Guardian, I think, in the early 2010s, and the whole point was like, I don't like it when people ask me about politics because I'm only interested in making music, and there's a lot of complex shit happening that is really, really difficult for me to articulate. But then on the other hand, when all the stuff happened, you know, with Black Lives Matter, he was like one of the first guys down there, you know, like they wrote the song Baltimore, you know, and he was the first person to be in the front line. So it's really interesting to see how people could be sort of moved into action when it's a cause that's much closer. And maybe it's probably the same for the guys that talk about Zion. I mean, and Godspeed, I mean, what's the singer's name?
Ephraim Minnock.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
he's not singing on
Yeah,
Godspeed,
yeah.
but
So I mean, what is his theory behind that? You know what I mean?
it's
like-
not Godspeed. You should
Clear.
make
Yeah,
that clear.
yeah.
It's not Godspeed. It's
Constellation.
Constellation don't ship that album to
Mhm.
Israel, but I would assume, given Godspeed's conduct when it comes to everything else, they are sticklers for detail, and I would assume if they had a problem with that, they would have taken exception to it and acted accordingly.
Speaking of cycles for detail, it's probably a really good time to go on the Foo Fighters Nexus.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Are we going to do the jingle? Let's do the jingle.
The jingle's coming. You'll hear it.
Right.
I'm going to work on it tomorrow.
Right. How did you like the jingle that I put in the other one?
It was good. I appreciated it. So Foo Fighters, Godspeed toured with 9 Inch Nails.
They did on the Tension tour.
Yeah, and 9 Inch Nails, Dave Grohl played drums on the album with Teeth. So it's 2 jumps.
That's 2 steps.
Oh, there you are, straight in.
But put the end of the jingle in here. But the whole thing of that is, it was like they're touring with a band who's on a major label,
Mm-hmm.
like one of the biggest
Yeah.
bands on earth.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how does that work?
I mean, it just means that they are obviously compromising at some point, because otherwise they'd just be sitting in a basement in Canada in a squat playing to their 9 other halves, and that would be it.
Trent
You've
Reznor's
got to
cool and
comprom-
anti-authority,
Yeah, no, but you know,
despite the fact he's in charge of Apple Music. He's like one of the.
it's as if they're living in the real world and trying to, you know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing though. They are living in the real world and trying to sort of navigate it within in a sustainable way. But at the same time, you have to then make clear that you two acknowledge the compromises you make and be a little bit more empathetic when it comes to other people who make compromises. So I think it's a complex thing. I actually don't think they're particularly guilty of.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
Of not
think
doing
it's maybe the folk on the internet and, you know, the whole crew that make loud noises about it that are the problem. I don't think that Godspeed are particularly guilty of being too hypocritical.
But it's a fair assumption, though.
Well,
I mean,
a famous Scottish phrase: "You fly with a cross, you get shot with a cross." And for our listener in Botswana, it's just like, you know, if you associate with certain things and if you court a certain thing, then it's not unreasonable that at some point you're also lumped in with that.
And obviously
that's exactly what I was going to say.
they hold themselves up to very high moral standards because they call out a lot of other folks, so they should expect to be called out themselves.
Yeah, it's true. That's
Even if
exactly the
it's-
point I was going to make, though.
Yeah.
So let's lighten the mood.
Yeah.
Kind of winding right back in 97, 98, F sharp, A sharp, Infinity landed. Once they kind of trimmed down to that 9-piece and really found their identity as a band, that was their first full release, and it caused a big stir at the time. F sharp, A sharp, Infinity is actually apparently Fades to Infinity. It's musical annotation for Fades to Infinity, and accordingly with the album itself, there's loads of nice touches with the original release of it. For example, it ends in a locked groove, so the album never actually finishes. It just keeps
It's pretty cool.
keeps spinning.
Yeah.
The original releases of it, I think they did 500 originally of this record, and there was no writing in the sleeve notes. There was no information, and the band painstakingly and true to their DIY roots, there was like an area around the edge of the vinyl. They scored in the track listing and the name of the record and such like by hand for these 500 records. I have no idea how easy it is or otherwise to score things into vinyl.
It's fucking mental.
Yeah. They also did this thing where, and they still do apparently, even though it's been reissued, if you buy it from them directly, it comes with like a little envelope with a bunch of things inside it, and the things inside it included all kinds of weird little knickknacks and doodads. There were drawings, apparently. I think some kind of receipt or ticket involved at one point, and the best one was the best one was they did a thing with a crushed penny. So they used to go out to this old rail yard and take Polaroids of the trains and put coins in the tracks, and the coins would be flattened to like wafer thin by the trains, and then they'd send you the coin and a picture of the train that flattened it, just as part of like this vinyl package that they put together for some people. And supposedly it's still all personalised to this day. F sharp, A sharp, Infinity is fantastic record. I mean, it's a really beautiful bit of music throughout. There's different versions of it, because I think the original releases, the CD and the vinyl versions are different lengths. I believe the CD one maybe has extra music on it, a secret track on it. And because it's the first one, and because it's caused such a splash, and because it had a wow factor, it's very nostalgic for people. It's really beautiful. It's most people's introduction to them, and it's hard to argue with that. I just don't think it represents where the band went. It's an unbelievable starting point, but it is. I think they've built on it. I don't think they're a band that were complacent. They did an EP called Slow Riot for New Zero Canada in '99. Funnily enough, considering the political conversation we had, the cover symbols of that are Hebrew, and they mean formless and empty. And they actually, the artwork for the packaging opens from right to left, since, you know, Hebrew you read right to left as opposed to left to right. That was recorded in Toronto, and it's a beautiful record. It's got a track in it called Moya,
it's great,
which is wonderful, named after their guitarist who'd left at that time but has since returned. And that was followed by Lift Your Skinny Fists Like Antennas to Heaven in 2000, which I believe was your jumping in point, right?
Yeah, that's the first record of theirs that I heard, and to be honest, it stayed with me. I've got to be honest, but other stuff happened at that time in my life when I heard it, so I didn't go back to explore more, because I'm not gonna lie, it's a big undertaking. Like, getting into Godspeed is a big undertaking.
There's a lot of tune involved. It is. And
at that time I wasn't up for that at all.
Well, that record is 4 tracks, but you're talking, I mean, I don't know how many minutes it is in total, but it's probably close to 80 odd.
For 1 hour and 27, so it's close to
87 minutes for 4 tracks. There is a lot of tune in that. There's a lot, even finding the bit you like. See, when you listen to an album as long as that, and that's a kind of a thing with Godspeed, that when you're doing a podcast like this, to try and identify the moments that you want to pull out and let people hear, it's like, where was that? What album even was that? Because it is the tracks are so huge and so sprawling. When you get the vinyls, quite often they're subdivided into movements, but if you're listening to it digitally, it's like 21 minutes, there you go, you become familiar with it, you start to map it out, but there's so much to try and get your head around. But it is a beautiful album. It is really, really good. It's euphoric, it's kind of creepy. I think it made a lot of the best album lists at the time, and subsequently.
Yeah, I picked it up because I've seen it regarded as being the best release, but I mean, at that time we'd only released a handful of things, so it broke up. So
it's got some really iconic moments of like sampling. There's a Coney Island dialogue, but the track Sleep, but it's about sleeping on the beaches in Coney Island and stuff. And it really conveys the sort of nostalgic, melancholy air. It's stunning stuff. After that came Yankee UXO. Now Yankee UXO 2002, we've got a Foo Fighters Nexus. We're going to have to get an Albini Nexus at some point, right? Because this, for me, is their weakest album, and it's the only one they did with Albini. They recorded it down at Electrical Audio. It sounds good. I don't think it sounds as good as some of their other stuff. It's not as lush. It's much colder, much darker. Some people loved it. I think if you look online, AllMusic give it like an absolutely glowing review, because it's demanding. It's quite a tough read. But the likes of Pitchfork said it was sluggish and lacked invention. And I have to be honest, like maybe 15 years after first finding it, hearing that album, I do kind of agree more with Pitchfork. I think it's nice in places, and Rockets Fall on Rocket Falls. It's good. They're good bits of music, but they don't reach those heights. They don't seem to go as far as Godspeed have realised they can. Maybe there was a bit of stagnation, I don't know, because this is the album that came directly before the extended hiatus, and perhaps that played a part, like I said earlier, in the decision. So then, and they vanished, and that was it. And they were gone for 7 years, and then they reunited for ATP. Wind forward another few years, and 2013 they bring out
this record,
Allelujah, Don't Bend, Ascend. And the only way we found out was because people who went to their gigs, suddenly there's this vinyl on their merch table, and people are like, excuse me, what's this one? What's this one? I've got these ones, but what's this one here? And they're like, alright, that's a new album. You're like, what? Like, it's just that moment of like, I was trying to like picture, like, especially for like the super fans, like picture the reaction of somebody who's just wandered into a gig they're probably excited to be at, and you're like, wow, I'm going to see Godspeed, I never thought I'd see these guys, or I've not seen them in 10 years, whatever. And then you just go up to the merch table and they've got a full new album sitting on the merch table that you're just like, what are you trying to do to me here? I just honestly, I can't imagine how excited I would have been like in that situation, especially when you then fucking get it out of its packet and it sounds like this. The first thing you hear is Mladic. I mean,
that's basically their equivalent of doing what Dave Grohl did. No, what Trent Reznor did with Nine Snails.
Grohl.
Yeah, he's on the brain.
That is the Foo Fighters Nexus starting to infect.
Totally is. Just, I am becoming one with the Nexus.
It's an AI.
Really, I think it's going to become sentient. But it's essentially the same as when Trent Reznor did, but Year Zero. Like, you just released it.
Aye, but Year Zero's not this.
Yeah. Still a great record in my opinion.
It's
but,
good, but it's not this.
But I think they'd toured with Nine Snails, hadn't they, at this point? So
2013 they toured, so this was out at around about the same time, yeah.
And they were probably, one of the reasons they would have probably toured with Dave Grohl, with Trent Reznor, with Nine Snails, is probably because of the shit. He wasn't I don't think he was on a label at that point. I think he was on his own. I think he just released Year Zero.
One of the Dave Grohls, but Dave Grohl.
One of the Dave Grohls, yeah. Dave Grohl. Some of those Dave Grohls need to.
Dave Grohl.
Because Dave Grohl was in another band as well, wasn't he?
Dave Grohl.
Yeah. Never seen him in the same room as a guy from Nirvana. Why is that?
Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could be right, and I do share that kind of weird thing. I mean, it's a credit to Nine Inch Nails that they always pick such good support bands, Death Grips and Godspeed You Black Emperor. But I was a little
Jay's
bit
Addiction. Soundgarden.
Soundgarden, yeah, that's a really good choice, man. I'd be delighted if I went to a show and it was Soundgarden and Nine Inch Nails, especially now.
Definitely now.
Confused and delighted, and a little bit nauseous. Yeah, so they followed Allelujah with Asunder, Sweet and Other Distresses. True to form with the names. Like, I don't think it's a great record, really. I was a little bit disappointed. I feel it's the closest in tone to Yankee UXO. It's a bit darker, it's a bit denser, it's more conventionally rocky as well. It's really just more of a rock record. That said, there's a track in it called Piss Crowns Are Trebled, which is at points absolutely beautiful. There's a bit at about 5.5 minutes in that where there's a kind of euphoric shift. Unfortunately, I think the rest of that album is a little bit, I don't know, just a little bit dark. It lacks the euphoria. I mean, they've talked about their sound in the past. I think some of the quotes he used to describe it was, "We want to make a joyous, difficult noise," which, yeah, it seems fair. This album didn't have as much of that joy. It has a lot of difficult noise in it, not as much of that joy. They've also said that every time they've written a tune, they've started with the blues and then pointed towards heaven. Okay, I'll give you that's a little bit pretentious, but
still a bit.
But again, that sense of like optimism that tends to like surface in their tracks. I mean, that bit in Piss Crowns is the only point I feel in Asunder where that really happens. And finally, in terms of their albums, the most recent was Luciferian Towers. And I have to say, when we were doing this, and I was adamant from an early point that we're putting Godspeed in here, I was hard pushed not to put this one in. And this would have been the most recent record that we'd included in the catalogue, or at least that we'd made a candidate for the catalogue. Now, it's 2017 it came out, and it is lush and rich throughout. There's hardly any filler on this one, even less so I would say than Allelujah. It's very lean and it's full of dynamics. It's got some very high points, some very beautiful low points, really patient opening track, takes until like 2 minutes in for the motif to emerge. Boss's Hang it's just a beautiful song. The third track, Famine, again is probably the closest they have to a pacer on Luciferian Towers, but it serves a purpose in the sense that it prepares you for track 4, Anthem for No State. Anthem for No State is, I think, their best track after Mladic. I've been kind of like weighing this up in my head. I think some people are very nostalgic, as I said, about F sharp, A sharp, Infinity, Face to Infinity. Anthem for No State is it's so good. The first 4 minutes are absolutely incredible, and then there's a bit after 12 minutes where the strings really come to the fore and the music half times. I think a lot of people, I noticed when I was talking about Godspeed, even the people who were a fan of Godspeed, they'd sort of not given that track the attention it deserved. It's the last track in the record, but if you are one of those people, go back and listen to Anthem for No State and really appreciate what a glorious bit of music it is. I mean, I honestly think it's as good as almost anything else they've done, and it also proves that they're as relevant as ever. I mean, how many bands are, have been about since 94 and are now making music that could potentially, at least in my opinion, be their best. I mean, it doesn't quite make it, but it's damn close.
I loved the last 2 records, but I don't think they reach the peaks of this.
Yeah, so the first song of the record is a stunning, probably one of, like you said, it's one of the, Chris, you said it's one of the best post-rock songs ever written.
Best.
Yeah, okay, I'd agree with that. Probably it's one of the best, I'd say.
It's in my top 10.
Yeah, and it's devastating.
It's
It's beautiful.
Emotionally devastating, as well as being, sonically devastating.
So the song's called Mladic, and it refers to the guy
Big Ratko
Mladic, the
Stuart Lee,
aka the butcher of Bosnia, who was he got a life sentence in The Hague after some of his absolutely horrendous activities in the Balkans in the early 90s, which, by the way, he got that life sentence the week before a guy called Slobodan Praljak, I don't know how to pronounce his name, took cyanide in the court. Have you ever seen that video?
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
Look that video up.
It's unbelievable.
It is a hoot.
It is a treat. I've never watched somebody die.
Watching that grizzled old fucker die. Yeah, he was so indignant. How dare you put me up in charges for massacring people? I'm gonna drink this vial of cyanide. You fucking fire in. I'll get you a couple of cubes of ice. But that guy, by the way, had been a film director before the war, and the fucking Balkans war is oh my god, it's unbelievable. Like the fucking Red Star Belgrade, one of the players in Red Star Belgrade was a Croat. Had to be smuggled out of Belgrade in the night because his fucking teammates were going to kill him. And like somebody had contacted them to tell him, and they formed a militia, like the Red Star such and such, formed one of the most heinous militias. And then after the war, back to playing football, guys. Just business as normal. The way that people drifted from this normal life into that. And one of the things with this song, the song was called, I think it was originally called Albanian on their set lists, and it obviously had an Eastern European feel. I think it's no small part of how good this song is, what they associated with just that word Mladic,
and the darkness as well,
weight of that.
Also the artwork on the album as well is really sort of,
it looks like a kind of rural house that's been
ominous,
either targeted or is like someone's watching it through night vision goggles or something. Something really haunting about it, and just the sheer irreconcilable misery of that conflict, and the fact that they just had to go back to living their lives and pretend. Anyway, so that and that song is as oppressive, I think, as they could get musically in terms of trying to approach the emotions that actually it understanding that conflict.
I've got an interesting anecdote from my life that I can share about this. And when I was at university, I did my dissertation, was a creative writing dissertation. And one of the guys who was in the course with me, a guy called Bradley, shout out Bradley if he's listening, I hope we're through, is awesome.
What's up, Brad?
He decided he's a fucking phenomenal poet, right? But he really likes sort of traditional meters and traditional forms and stuff. And he decided that he was going to do basically a whole dissertation on the Serbian-Bosnian War, and it broke him.
I can imagine.
It actually broke. Like he said, some of the stuff he wrote was phenomenal, but his dissertation ended up pretty much primarily being a whole massive sort of explanation as to why he couldn't do it. It's fucking and he's just an English guy from fucking Buckinghamshire. Do you know what I mean? He's never actually written since either, which is staggering.
Imagine as a musician, I mean, okay, they wrote the song and then retrospectively sort of called it this, I'd imagine, but the feeling of this song, I mean, it's so intense. It's so consistently intense, even the way it starts. So it's got this sample at the start.
With his arms outstretched. Okay. Can you get her? Do you see her? No. Shoot. Hang on. With his arms outstretched.
Some people have speculated that it was to do with Mladic actually being arrested, but it actually also, especially given Godspeed's politics and their aesthetic, it reminded me of a videotape called Collateral Murder that WikiLeaks released, which was to do with an Iraqi helicopter targeting civilians. Well, they said fighters, but absolutely butchering a group of people in Baghdad, that became like the thing that made WikiLeaks public enemy number one when it came to the US government, but also relevant at the time, albeit not the Russian proxy that they seem to have become. That even that introduction, it gives it the context of war, gives it the context of surveillance, of very modern warfare as well, I think. You know, the radio commentary and the cameras and stuff like that. And it starts in a really patient building but very dark fashion. There's about 3.5 minutes of building strings and a kind of strange loop and a kind of percussive thing that gives away to this like big piano stab. And it's only then that the band and the drums and the bass really start to appear at nearer the 5 minute mark. The guitars don't even come in, I think, until about 6.5.
Yeah, it's maybe about 7 minutes.
Maybe
much.
Even later. Yeah. So it's incredibly patient and incredibly it really. If you're not in the headspace for it, it puts you in the headspace for it.
It's also like, for a lot of people, this is like you're listening to this record 10 years after the last Godspeed, and you're like, what is this going to be like? And although it's, you know, a dark subject matter, they're also kind of teasing, you know, the listener. They're like, you're gonna have to be patient because we're going to fuck you up. And so all of that is, it's almost like that's not the song. That's just to set the tone. It's like after the 7 minute mark that the drums kind of pick up the pace of the song, guitars start to come in. There's a repetitive riff the first time it really starts to develop in that sense. Then the Eastern European theme comes in. I mean, that's the problem with describing Godspeed songs. Is you can't just describe the one just
song.
That big bit, and then the other bit and stuff.
One progression can become like the equivalent of a full song by another band.
Yeah.
So after the 9 minute mark, you've got a really beautiful moment where the rest of the band join that riff. So the riff's established, the band are circling around it, and then suddenly they all kind of like latch on.
Yeah, and I always think on that bit, it's like you can kind of see a conductor just going, all right, fucking everybody in now.
Yeah, it's a kind of goosebumpy bit.
Yeah. And
this song has got no shortage of goosebumpy bits. The song, it kind of keeps building up, and kind of sonically the frequencies all start to fill after the 10.5 minutes. Gets into about 11 minutes, and there's like a kind of lull. It's sort of, it does this weird kind of counterintuitive drop where it just pulls you back, and it almost sounds like the song's about to end, but then there's that like 13 minute mark thing where there's just suddenly that big bombastic doom thing that sets the scene,
Yeah.
and it starts to repeatedly strike, and it's almost like if the band was an equivalent of a giant church bell. It's just this ominous, deathly strike, and then 13 and a half. I think, as I said, this is the best post-rock bit of music ever, and I think 13 and a half minutes in this song, when that kicks in, the goosebumps go up. Just having seen it live as well, it's the most fantastically realised use of the entire genre that I'm aware of anyway. And it, as I say, it's one of those bits that elicits such strong feelings that you can start to see how the name is justified. This is something that makes you feel,
absolutely,
wow, like really overwhelming. It's an incredibly powerful bit of music. And then they do that thing again where they ebb away, and then once more, it's like just shy of the 15-minute mark, they come in with a faster riff, and it's kind of a newly developed riff, but it keeps kind of undulating. It kind of comes in, drops out, comes in, drops out, and then kind of get into a pattern of doing this, and then the final hold, and just I think to show how mature this band is and how confident they are as a band, that final hold, it's like a minute and 50, they hold the last holding pattern. You just keep you waiting, you know it's coming, especially if you've heard the song before, you know it's coming, but they make you wait so long for it, so long, and then the payoff is sensational.
It's just really interesting that the band coming back, you know, from 10 years off and producing this piece of music that's obviously been worked on, but like a lot of other bands might overwork it, or, you know, like pare it down, or, you know, shorten it or something, but they, I don't know, they just get everything right. They get the dynamics right, they get the orchestration right, it's just ridiculous how on it they were. And that's, I think, just with this whole record, you know, they did run the risk of coming back with a record that was trying to live up to what they were before, and, you know, didn't quite do it, or, you know, try and copy what they did.
There's definitely a vibe of kind of going, hey, remember us?
Yeah,
we're still here.
But like somehow I think this album, and I agree that this is the one that should go in, I think they just perfected everything that they did before, and also what they missed out in that 10 years. It sounds like they just built on it.
Plus, this song was in their set list for about 3 years before this album came out, and I think you can really tell, like, all that refinement that you're talking about, all that kind of the orchestration, the reason it's so well it's so well realised is probably because they spent a good year and a half, 2 years playing it live and seeing the response, seeing how it worked dynamically before they did that.
Yeah, so track 2, the Helicopter Singer, I remember after hearing Mladic when I was driving back from Edinburgh late at night, this came on, and it kind of, even though it's like a filler track, I guess you could say, it retains like the ambience of the sort of dread or the terror at the end of Mladic. I think both of the filler tracks, I guess, if you want to call them filler tracks, both of the kind of pacing tracks, or whatever you want to call them, they kind of both serve that purpose of like keeping the atmosphere going with before hitting you with the next movement.
I totally agree. I think given the weight of Mladic prior to that as well, it's, you know, how do you come out of something that's so seismic? How do you come out of something that's so powerful? And I think it was an essential form of pacing. I was trying to come up with an analogy for it, and I really feel it sounds like an orchestra warming up in like a Darren Aronofsky film. There's some dissonance but malevolence to it. There's an uneasiness to it. There's a bits of synth, and there's bagpipes on the top of that. They're kind of pushing through, but it's really troubling. It's a really troubling song, and it has a kind of holding pattern feel to it, and like you said, to stay in the mood, stay where we've got you, don't leave, we're just going to change over. But then, funnily enough as well, track 3, it kind of transitions into track 3, We Drift Like Worried Fire, and I really do feel that this is one of the reasons that I think this album edges it. I don't think this in and of itself is one of the strongest Godspeed songs, but it's a beautiful counterpiece in its tone to Mladic and to Their Helicopters Sing, because it is, I think, the most conventionally post-rock they've done maybe ever. I mean, it has a lot of the motifs and a lot of the approaches that you would see in post-rock later on, at least. So it emerges out of that drone from Helicopter Sing, but it starts to go into the plucked violins, the plucked string instruments, which become like quite seasick, and then gradually the guitars intervene, and I think about the 3-minute mark there's a guitar motif that starts to emerge and the drums join in, and then the xylophone becomes a really big part of it, and the xylophone, I think, dictates a lot of the tone of the songs. It feels like a little bit more whimsical. It lightens the mood just a little bit.
It's definitely when you talked about earlier on about how they try to make joyous noise, it brings the joyous element back in after the devastating first two songs.
Yeah, it does, and I think it's kind of important, like to try and balance the tone like that, because in some of those other records like Yankee UXO, I don't think they found that balance. Yeah, so and then there's a kind of really nice violin counterpoint that comes in about 4.5 minute mark just after. The strings shift again after the 6.5 minute mark. It eventually kind of bursts into, like, it's not explosions in the sky, but it does go into that much more trad version of post-rock, and as close as I think they've got to that around about that point, albeit there's more orchestration happening in the back. It's not just loads of delay pedals and a bunch of board guys for the United States milking their
huge effects boards,
churning out the same old generic post-rock shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to give too much away about how I feel about explosions. And then at the 11-minute mark, it does this thing where it drops down to these really fine threads of feedback. Again, another really mature, confident bit of songwriting. It starts to develop a kind of minor motif underneath. It really goes down, gets really delicate, and just starts to become a little bit sinister. It emerges into this weird metallic percussive stuff, and then this really ominous orchestral thing starts to push through. There's a marching snare that kind of comes through the centre and builds up some tension, and then around about 15 minutes, that tension that they've been building since the 11-minute mark sort of resolves as the drums straighten out, and it becomes like a really propulsive track. It becomes this really driving, and as straight as I think Godspeed get when it comes as regards their songwriting. It really just pushes on. And there's a riff that kind of starts to do a callback to the earlier motif, but in a much more major way. It's much more upbeat. It becomes basically rock music, and I think that's where when we were talking about it being neoclassical. I think this is one of the things. This is a really great example of them bucking that trend of drifting too much into that esoteric realm, that quite dry and quite austere realm of classical music, or at least how it can sometimes be perceived. And then just after the 17 mark, it just chokes itself, and then has this like slight reprise with a string descent, and then it does this big crashing ending over all these really busy drums at the end. it's, I don't think, and like I said, I don't think on its own it's one of their absolute best bits of music, but it's such a nice counterpiece. It's such a kind of yin and yang thing with Mladic that it makes it. The two songs benefit from each other.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's it. Like, you could easily have put another track on this that was weighty and somber and devastating. And you know, if you put Piss Crowns in this, for example, which is probably, I think, maybe a slightly better song, it wouldn't have done Mladic any favours. And I don't think Mladic would have done it any favours. It would have overshadowed it. It was important that they went in a different direction for this track, and yeah, I think they really succeeded. And then it just, there's the fourth track, again, name wise, Strung Like Lights at the Printemps. Brilliant. I mean, and do you think this is bad? Wait till we do a Silver Mount Zion episode, which is even more absurd. But that's got like a weird discordant hangover feeling. Like, it's almost like post-coital, but like really bad sex. It's like that awkwardness when you've just fucked your best friend's dad.
I've never been there personally.
This is how I recall it. But it's an extremely uneasy track, and they choose to finish the album in that way. They choose to finish it on an uneasy note. They don't finish with a big lavish, you know, like orgasm of music like they've done, for example, with Luciferian Towers. They finish Anthem for No Stay. It's just such a beautiful ending. They don't do that. They kind of go for an anticlimax here. They go for a down ending, and it reflects, I think, it reflects the weighty tone of the record overall, because it is a weightier record, but it's a far better balanced weighty record than a couple of the others, like Asunder, for example.
So I think if we're going to put any Godspeed record in, it should probably be this one. What do you guys think?
We said the two that are the most contentious are Luciferian Towers and Lift Your Skinny Fists, but I do think for the sheer power of Mladic,
I think I love Lift Your Wrists as well, but I like
Lift Your Wrists. Skinny Fists.
Sorry,
that's a fucking great record.
I love Skinny Wrists. You know, it's amazing. But
Skinny Wrists.
What am I talking about?
That would have been the one I would have went for, to be honest. But it's the only one I've spent time with. So
I think this one, just the production's better. I think it's heavier. I don't know. I just like this one more as well.
It pushes out in all the extremes a bit further. I feel like it's heavier. It's sweeter, it's more sinister, it's more ambient. It has all the extremes. The only thing I think it lacks is that the tenderness of Luciferian Towers. I think that's got an element of tenderness in it that this misses out on, but that is the only ingredient that doesn't really rival. I just think it's an absolute masterpiece of like contemporary music.
I think this will inspire some really interesting discussion.
Yep.
I think a lot of fans will be interested in
why this one.
Yeah, well, to be honest, if I know David's into them, but if you'd been more into Godspeed, I would have suggested we do a mixtape just on Godspeed, because I think their catalogue is that strong that we could have easily picked those three albums and argued about them. But I mean, I am completely behind this. I love this bit of music.
So go to our Facebook page and vote and tell us if you think we're right or wrong. Also, leave us some ratings and reviews, because we fucking love that shit.
Ratings and reviews, please. Ratings and reviews.
We'd love to have some of them.
Oh, by the way, quick shout out to one of our sponsors, Craig
got to talk about him. Yeah, that guy did some cool shit.
Who today got one.
And his wife, Rachel, who I lived with in Melbourne for a year.
Yep.
Really?
David did some well. And they today got won the equivalent of Dragon's Den, or yesterday won the equivalent of Dragon's Den down in Australia, and with their new Donugs,
which is like chicken nugget donuts, which sounds fucking amazing.
It sounds
maybe
like
not to Dave, of course.
As a vegan, I strongly disapprove of them, but good work, Craig.
Sounds like something
anyway.
Craig would get behind.
Yeah, he's a
but
good
also
lad.
he has donated the most obscene amount of money.
We're going to call it
the Crag.
The Crag.
Going forward, let's go with the Crag.
Well, $10 is a Fritz and 50 is a Crag. So somebody needs to claim 20.
Yeah.
Be immortalised. What are we doing next week, David?
I think, what are we doing, David?
I can't remember what we're doing next week. Oh, Are we doing Best Coast?
Yes, we'll do Best Coast. We're doing Best Coast then.
That's an absolute treat.
What's the album called?
Crazy Like You, which is very good.
It's very sunny and surfy.
That's a proper summer album. We should have done that.
Should have done that tonight. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'll be pissing down as usual.
I know. Oh well.
Well, anyway, thanks guys. It's been great.
Ciao.